Up next, we will have a panel on sourcing sustainable products responsibly, hosted by Heidi Spurrell, the CEO of Food Made Good Hong Kong. Please welcome Heidi and our speakers.
I don't have slides. Want to go first? Yeah. In the middle? In the middle. Yeah. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, so welcome to the Sustainable Sourcing panel on day 2. And hello to our friends on Zoom. Sorry you can't be here. I'm Heidi Spurrell, for those of you who don't know me. I'm the CEO of Food Made Good. We are a food sustainability consultancy, and I'm really glad that agriculture was mentioned at the end of the last talk, because it really is an important factor if we are going to address climate change. Food contributes about 25 to 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions globally. So that's something to think about when you were discussing climate. So in our role, we're here to support restaurants and the hospitality sector. We work with all kinds of organizations that serve food in a public space. We help them get them onto their sustainability journey, and auditing sustainability in the food service sector is one of the core services that we provide. So today I'm really happy to be here moderating this panel of a very diverse panel. We're going to hear from 3 different perspectives: food service sector, fashion and apparel, and also the FMCG, talking about challenges we're facing in the current climate, not just during COVID, but also because of the urgency we're facing with the climate crisis. So we're going to be taking questions at the end, so please think through your questions as we go along. So just to wake up your brain, I want to sort of set the context. What do we mean when we're talking about sourcing sustainable products? We're really in uncharted territory here with this double whammy of COVID and the long-term climate crisis. Entrenched in many of the global supply chains are environmental abuse, poor working conditions, unequal distribution of profits, and inefficient use of resources. So as we go through this panel, I'll be trying to understand a bit more in terms of how do we engage our chefs and our brands and our retailers in buying sustainably sourced products or food. How do we transform our supply chain and our business models to distribute more value more equally, and to do this without further damaging our natural resources? How do businesses address barriers and to transparency? So looking forward, how do we identify and build opportunities for sustainable jobs and livelihoods? How do we grow resilience of farmers and workers and communities? How do we ensure women empowerment, no child or slave labor in the supply chain, or even worse, fatalities on farms? So here today, I'd like you to think about how you as a business can prioritize some of these very big picture issues. Let's start off with perhaps Richard to give an introduction for a couple of minutes, and then we'll go along.
Hello, my name is Richard Ekkebus. I'm the Director of Culinary Operations and Food and Beverage at the landmark Mandarin Oriental. I am in Hong Kong since 16 years. I have opened this amazing hotel that was created by Mandarin Oriental as their second hotel in this city, to be completely different than the place we called the Legend or the Mandarin Oriental. So it's the only hotel within the Mandarin Oriental portfolio that operates under a platinum brand or a platinum fan. And that means that we are quite a forward-thinking hotel and always trying to push the boundary and the ideas, and at times operate as a think tank for the Mandarin Oriental group.
And I also should say that Richard is on the advisory board of Food Made Good, and Amber, the restaurant, his restaurant is one of our founding members. So really leading the way, and as you say, sometimes being the naughty sister of the other hotel, the Mandarin Oriental. So we've seen some really progressive work there. Perhaps we could just hear from you, Anna. Could you introduce what you do?
Yes, sure. So my name is Andreoli, and I'm heading the global sales and strategic partnership team for Pivot 88. I'm Italian, been in Hong Kong for about 6 years, and I joined Pivot 88 3 years ago because I really loved the attention that Pivot 88 had for the supply chain, in the sense of bringing transparency and enabling companies to have that visibility for a better and more sustainable supply chain. So that's me.
Thanks, Anna. So Anna is going to give us the apparel and fashion perspective today. And Joyce, perhaps you could introduce yourself.
Thank you, Heidi, and it's my pleasure to be here this morning. Not just because joining this event, but before this building was born, I used to live here.
Oh,
the block before this was built. Trust me, it was not sustainable by that time in modern terms, but in modern terms, it was sustainable because it didn't have escalator. We have to walk every day. It is another way to look at sustainable development of living. So amfori, don't worry if you can't pronounce it, because it's not English word. Nobody knows how to pronounce it. It's coming from an ancient Greek word. We used to be called Foreign Trade Association, and we are based in Brussels. We represent 2,400 member companies from all over the world. They are mainly brands, retailers, and buyers who focus on doing trade with purpose, meaning we focus on social compliance, sustainable practice in sourcing, and also building a sustainable supply chain together. So we have a set of social compliance standard called amfori BSCI. Some of our members are here today, and we cover 21 sectors in fast-moving consumer goods. So everything we wear, you see here, our standard cover. Many people, when we talk about sustainable products, just focus on the product itself. They tend to forget who made it, who are the workers behind the scene. And so we have the standard to monitor, to build the capacity of the supply chain partners to make sure everything is sustainable in all standard and holistic manner. My role in the organization is I'm located in Hong Kong, and I cover all the Asia Pacific region. It covers all our top sourcing countries, including China, India, even Turkey, and Bangladesh and Vietnam. So we will cover more what we are doing, and we can work together later in our discussion.
Thanks, Joyce. So let's start really big picture, and let's start with food, because that's the space that I'm really comfortable in. So Richard, what does sourcing sustainably mean to you?
Sourcing sustainably to me means that the ingredients we source, or the products we source, are measured in various areas, such as ethical, sustainability, to make sure that you have a product, and environmentally, to make sure that you have a product that suits our needs.
But how do you know that when the supply chain is so long? Can you give us an example? How do you make sure? Are there standards out there to help you? And I know you're very keen on sustainably sourced fish. You've been a real big advocate in that space. How can chefs, how can restaurants, how can consumers know if they're actually consuming sustainably sourced fish, for example?
Yeah, well, fish is close to my heart because I was born and raised in an area that is under the sea level in the southwest of Holland. So we struggle daily, protecting ourselves from the natural elements. It's a fisherman's village, so from a young age I was involved with fishery and fishing, and I have seen the decline myself as from a child to an adult. And it was something that when we started 15 years ago, Amber, was something that I was very passionate about to make positive change. And that over time has shaped also a policy that we now have adapted within the group, is that we, within Mandarin Oriental, would only source sustainably sourced fish and seafood. as I mentioned, I am a chef, so for me it's very important not only to have the most beautiful product, but also to make sure that we contribute to a supply chain that is not disrupted by shortage of supply. So that is by us making the right choices, not always making the choices that are the most popular choices. The great thing of us as chef is that we have the power to influence our consumers. So we can make positive change by choosing at times fish that are maybe not as sought after. And through that, we can then highlight that not only sea bass, turbo, and sole are delicious fish. You know, the fact is that there's only bad chefs and no bad fish. So every fish properly prepared is a great fish.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, isn't it? To really stay diversified on your menu and to communicate that. Because if you don't communicate it, how will your customers appreciate it?
Yes, we communicate it on our menus. So we and not only on fish, we do that on ethically sourced protein, eggs, vegetables, fruits. We promote this because we feel it's important to have that pride within our offering, and also that people are confident that when they eat that they do something that contributes to a better environment.
Yeah, it seems like a no-brainer. You know, if you're a chef, you want to ensure that those ingredients, those resources will still be out there in years to come.
Well, exactly, and I'm not the youngest chefs. I'm in the 50s, so I have seen a decline in availability, and I've seen shifting of seasons. I have seen shortages of products within seasons, and that are the impacts of global warming. So we see daily in the way we source that there is a real stress on our ecosystem, and that is impacting the food that is delivered on a daily basis to our restaurants.
So how can you ensure that transparency? Is it about knowing the fishermen? Is it about speaking to your distributor? How can you be assured in that supply chain that it is what you believe it to be?
Well, relationships are very important, and it is the cornerstone of any good restaurant, is that you have very strong relationships. But, you know, every relationship, there's flaws. So we need to look for systems and certifications at times to make sure that what they preach is also what they are bringing to us. So within Mandarin Oriental, we have been putting a lot of effort, particularly in the last few years, on the sourcing parts of agricultural ingredients. And what we're building now is a system, an ordering system that is completely transparent, and that basically you would not be able to order certain ingredients unless we have a certification of the product. So, and that guarantees transparency, and also that guarantees that we can look on a monthly, a quarterly, a yearly basis on what our performances are within the different food groups.
That's great, and I'm glad you mentioned transparency along the supply chain, and it sounds like you also rely a little bit on some technology in this system. So with that, I want to move on to Anna, because I know that tech is a real big part of what you do. But first, before we ask about the tech, what does transparency in the supply chain mean to you, for example, in the fashion and apparel industry?
Yes, so talking about the fashion and apparel industry, but it actually applies to every industry. A transparent supply chain would be one where all the parts are sharing the information openly at all stages, from raw materials, compliance with CSR, environmental or other standards, but also product quality and processes, all the way at all the steps of manufacturing. So in the case of food, would be more on the cooking, like from the raw ingredient to the plate. In the case of the apparel industry, we're talking about cotton that becomes a piece of garment, for example. And so how does that lead to sustainable sourcing is through, as I said, all the parts sharing what's happening and being accountable for what they're doing. So what brands eventually and consumers eventually want to know about is who the suppliers are and who their suppliers are, how they source their products and where all the products are coming from, products and raw materials are coming from, how they treat their people, for example, to go into the labor. So we're talking about wages, labor protection, health and safety and all that. And also how they manage and control manufacturing processes, or how do they dispose of, I don't know, chemicals, or how do they treat their wastewater and all that. So, but as I said earlier, it cannot be, I mentioned the brand, the consumer, the manufacturer, but it cannot be only one part that works on this, and it has to be a joint effort of all the different stakeholders in the industry.
Yeah, I think stakeholders is something that is really important when we're trying to push sustainability or get in that direction, because there are so many issues along the chain. We can't be experts in everything, so you really have to sort of seek expertise along that supply chain. And one of the ways that you do it quite well, or what you're known for, is using technology in order to ensure that every single step of the way you know what's happening, and to reduce fraud or any of those things. Can you tell us a bit about the technology that is involved?
Exactly. So, well, technology is kind of a very broad concept, but really what technology enables is visibility through data. And that connects again to what Richard was saying about certifications. And what technology does is gathers all the information in one place through different sources and different ways. And I'll go a little bit later into how we do it specifically. But it's really about that data that comes out of the digitalized collection or data gathering or information gathering that allows to avoid delays in taking decisions, or as soon as an issue is identified, and both on compliance and quality, actions can be taken faster, because there's no need to wait for last week's reports or last month's reports. And so when the data is real time and consolidated, it's really, and actionable, it really allows to manage risks and take action faster.
That's great. So let's come on to Joyce, because I'm sure all of these issues that we're talking about will be familiar to you. You've been working in this area for quite a long time, Joyce. Can you tell us what sourcing sustainability means to you in your sector? I mean, you work in so many sectors, but I'm sure there'll be common threads throughout all of these sectors.
Yeah, indeed. The challenges, yes, I think everybody are aware of that, but the way we approach those issues is different from brand-driven approach, because we are a initiative. We have members from Europe, we have members from Asia, we have members from the Americas. So we have to set up some common standard, the common language when we talk about compliance or in continuous improvement. We are not a certification system. Many people like to certify this supply is good, this product is good or bad. We don't take this approach. We take approach of continuous improvement through capacity building, meaning the buyers and suppliers should work together. When we find, say, child labor, forced labor, where are the loopholes? How can we prevent that? We have found a factory damage the environment. What are the root causes? Who caused that? Can we do things together? So the way we approach to resolve the issues like, say, sourcing sustainable product responsibly, first of all, we need a common standard. So our standard is applicable across different sectors, over 20 sectors, as I said. And the second thing is build a capacity. Many of the social challenges we nowadays, Heidi, we spoke offline, we find Hong Kong is supposed to be a developed economy. However, when we talk about, say, responsibility, responsible, sustainable sourcing, we are still stuck in, say, working hours, minimum wage. People talking about decent working hours, work-life balance already. Even factory talk about fair remuneration, not just minimum wage, holistic manner. When people talk about no bribery, we talk about ethical business behavior. Every single decision we make, including recruitment, should be included. So this is the way we look at it. And even many environmental protection challenges, we talk about even the panel before us. Yes, the challenges are there, but I think the problem is lack of solutions, affordable solutions. And we can't just say expect our government can do things all. Every one of us can contribute. And I think quite often we heard many suppliers have challenges, and then buyers may drop them if they don't do a good job, but we don't believe this approach is sustainable. Yeah. So I think we believe stakeholder engagement like today, we like fusion across sectors, a collaboration would be good. When we measure partners' performance, whether they can be your long-term partners, please take a holistic way to not penalize those bad performers, but encourage them and award those good performers.
It sounds like you're talking about a little bit like pre-competitive space, trying to get industries together, trying to get stakeholders together with sustainability at the center, at the forefront. So let's just get into a bit of detail here. If we're talking about risk in the supply chain, how do you know there's a risk? How do you detect it? And can you give an example, a concrete example?
Yeah, and back to year 2003, we have different brands coming to us. They have their proprietary system to measure, say, the risk, and then assess the different factories' performance, suppliers' performance, and then they become audit fatigue. Yeah, so we measure the risk. After we partner with globally 13 international auditing companies, so they use the same standard to measure the same 11 principle code of conduct with reference to, say, international labor organizations and UN guiding principle for business for human rights. So when they say one company assessed this, for example, a German buyer, Metro, buy product from company A and assessed according to our standard by a third party, the results will be acceptable by over 2,400 member companies. If there's a gap between the standard and the performance, we provide free training to suppliers. Through our membership fee, of course, we are non-profit making.
Yeah.
But then factories can learn the common standard and know how to improve. Yeah.
That's great. It's very thorough. Maybe we can ask Anna-Marie, in terms of solutions, how does Pivot 88 work with organizations?
What Pivot 88 would do is provide a platform where all the data could be collected. So amfori is one of the examples with the BSCI standard that can be actually supported on Pivot 88 if one of our clients decides to go down to use them as a standard. There are other standards in the industry that can also be reflected. This is on the compliance side, but really what the system does is all the steps of manufacturing from raw material to consumer. So we would go from really raw material traceability and information on where really the cotton was farmed all the way to the finished garment, to go back to the cotton example, but also all the quality steps during manufacturing, which are quite important in the sense that there's a lot of risk and cost attached to quality, to lack of quality, which results in returns, reworks, scrap, or additional transportation fees that are all bad in terms of both money and environmental cost. And as I mentioned earlier, we have the data analytics part where all the information is collected for faster and better decision, meaning that going back to the example of compliance, our brands, the brands we work with, can collaborate with their suppliers to make sure that there is a continuous improvement in case an issue is identified and issues are addressed and approached accordingly in real time.
So there isn't really one global standard then for apparel, and also Joyce is saying there isn't, you don't set standards, you try to help the process along more.
Well, there are
no, Anna, just continue, Anna. Sorry.
You're first.
So yes, so there are various different standards, and in the industry, here I'm talking about the apparel industry, but it applies to every industry. And there are several organizations that have been quite successful at really connecting the brands with the manufacturers and like brands, retailers, and manufacturers. Really, I think it's a matter of finding the standards that would fit better with a company's like values and go with it and work with their suppliers to make sure that everyone is aligned and compliant.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. Many people, when they come to standards, become very fatigued or they feel annoyed. Yeah? There are good or bad reason why we have different standards, because different economies, different industry have different pace of development. We have to be patient about that. And why even we are facing multiple standards, doesn't mean they are competing or try to kill each other. In the older days, yes, yeah, for survival, but now we know we can't survive on our own. Like Hong Kong, we can't survive on our own. So we have to collaborate. So even between standards, we see recognition. Yeah, there's a social labor convergence initiative, and we're also part of it. So we are not just trying to promote ours and then try to make others fail. That's not the purpose. So we try to find a common ground, work together where we can improve together. So, and we appreciate brands like Anna Maria's approach. You recognize the best of all, and then you collaborate those having differences. Yeah.
That's really good to hear, because I think sometimes we can get overwhelmed with standards, and the answer is that there is no silver bullet, and you have to find what standard works for you as an organization, because they're all very different for different countries, different contexts, different regulatory issues where the companies are operating. So let's stick to standards, Richard. How do you find, in the food service sector, how are you able to measure what you're doing is in the right direction? How do you know, and what help is out there?
Well, first of all, we build our own system within Mandarin Oriental where we in the agricultural commodities, where we measure on a daily basis the progress on what we buy sustainably. We do the same with paper and office supplies. We do the same with seafood, and we're working right now on animal protein, so eggs, meat, and poultry. Besides that, it's about building partnerships, and for us that was really working with Food Made Good, not only because they have a lot of experience and a lot of information at our disposal, but also because they have an audit process that actually would legitimize all our efforts through the audit process that they do on a yearly basis. So that for us has been very critical. And besides that, it's about having a team of people that is extremely passionate and that is enabled collectively that we can drive for change. This is not driven by me personally, it's driven by a large team of people. And that is, I think, for every company structure important to have such a structure in place, that you have the buy-in of all your employees into what you want to achieve.
That's so important, isn't it? Finding champions internally that will take this on, and even if it's not part of their job description, that they, to find those passionate, identify those passionate people. So how have you managed to do that, being the naughty little sister hotel to the Mandarin Oriental? How have you managed to persuade your colleagues to really get on board with taking this holistic approach?
Well, first of all, with a lot of common sense, 6 years ago at the Landmark, we started to eliminate single-use plastic, and that now, a year ago, has been adopted as a group policy to eliminate by next year all single-use plastics from our operations. So that is definitely something that is extremely important. It's incredible the amount of plastic that is used within a hotel and within a restaurant on a daily basis, and the contribution we have towards the plastic pollution problem. There were, over the 50 years that we have driven all these different initiatives, there were very different parts of sustainability that we have addressed and what we're working on. To be quite frankly, it is a constant work in progress. It is not something that is done and dealt with and we can tick off the box and we move on running a very successful business. It is something that needs to be reassessed on a consistent basis. So for example, certain things are also intertwined. Our waste management, where we started to weigh on a daily basis all different types of waste that we started about 12 years ago, has now enabled us to reduce considerably the amount of output that we have within our hotel. And there we also found out that certain practices we had didn't make sense. By measuring, for example, glass, we saw that sometimes we bought items in the wrong unit size. So then you can say, we will buy things in bulk because that makes sense and that creates less pollution. We could also buy much more attractively. So some investments also create certain opportunities of cost savings at times as well.
So there's a real trial and error going on.
It is definitely trial and error. And to be quite frankly, is because over the 15 years we have learned a lot along the way. And it's by just driving ourselves and our interests within these different areas that we have learned a lot on how to do things better. Sometimes we had things wrong, and by these trial and errors and learning, we have modified, adjusted, and moved forward as a better unit.
It's having that willpower to stick to it, isn't it, and not give up as well, because it's...
Yes, yes. And also, I mean, we have the message of our CEO in the last weeks was very clearly, I mean, our hotels have a very clear sustainable agenda, and he was very clear in his message. We will at no time walk away from our objective in making sure that our sustainability goals are met. So there's no excuse, even in difficult times as now, to make sure that we make constant progress and efforts in improving.
Yeah, and I absolutely applaud you, because it is a really difficult time for the restaurant sector, and we have seen in our own experience that these restaurants have really stuck to their guns on their principles on sustainability whilst managing these really difficult financial times. Thanks, Richard. So maybe, Anna, could I ask you about some best practices that you've seen in the work that you're doing?
Well, I would say every single client that works with us can be considered a best practice per se, because they decided to lead the change and start with this digitization journey and open their own supply chain to being more transparent. Examples I like, I'm just thinking of, for example, the way some of our clients have stopped running audits or inspections themselves or through third-party inspection firms. Reason being that they trust their suppliers with the information that the supplier shares. And this reduces traveling time, reduces costs for the brands, but still results in better compliance and quality. And just to conclude on how Pivot 88 does it, and basically what we bring to the industry or to the supply chain is based on our 4 pillars, which are collaboration, communication, transparency, and trust. And if you think about it, it's about collaborating, so having everything in, all the information in one place, communicating, because all the players are on the same platform and are able to connect immediately. Transparency that results from the amount of information that is shared and collected on the platforms. And trust that is the natural results of all these things combined. Thanks,
Anna. And perhaps, Joyce, I'm going to ask you a question from the crowd, because I'm watching the time here. Benjamin has asked, transparent supply chains are critical for sustainable development of different industries and sectors, and you work in many sectors. Other than audits, how can companies monitor their supply chain more effectively? And how can the company enhance its foreseeable and predictability to drive positive social environmental impact? So this question, I suppose, is really about, other than doing reporting, what can they do to monitor?
Yeah, certainly. I'm glad this question is raised to give me the opportunities to elaborate what we're doing. Actually, auditing is just the start of the journey, or the monitoring system to measure the risk at a certain point of the time when you source goods. The most important pillar we work together with the industry is capacity building, training, and knowledge sharing, best practices. I can quote you some examples of best practices to monitor the risk, and not just monitor, because monitoring is just like policing. You're always finger pointing, this is no good, this is no good. We dropped the term like corrective action plan 5 years ago already. We use remediation. That means you can always do better. It's not like you're doing something wrong, improve, no. So this is the approach, how can we make things transparent, reporting. And then the second thing is best practice, give incentives. And then things will become more transparent. People will be honest, because you give incentives to the good performers, not punish the bad performer. That was a very old-fashioned. And third is fusion. Even in Cambodia, we have witnessed some fusion, very crossover collaboration. We saw a insurance company, when they tried to grant premium rate to a factory, you know the standard they took about social compliance is our standard, amfori BSCI, whether they have a good protection for the workers' health and safety. If they can meet our standard through the audit results, then they can present to the insurance company, and they get very properly protected and at a very good premium rate. And that also gives confidence to the buyer. That means they can operate the factory sustainably. So I hope we can see more of this in Hong Kong, because we have financing industry always just judge good or bad companies based on their P&L performance. That's not sustainable, sorry. Profit making doesn't mean they are sustainable. Social, environmental is more reasonable measurement to measure those risks. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned incentives, because at the end of the day, we're just all human, and we need to be motivated to do the right thing. So thanks for that. So just in the interest of time, I think I'm going to summarize, and I think we've got a slide here, some of the things that we've talked about, because we're here to talk about solutions and what you can do when you go back to your own organizations. So I think there's 4 points that I want to bring up. The importance of trying to achieve transparency and traceability across the entire supply chain. So we've brought that up many times, from raw inputs all the way to farm, processing, manufacturing, right the way to the end consumer. Really try to understand what's happening along the entire chain. It's critically important, not just for business reputation, but also to give your brand the assurance and integrity so you can communicate that back. Working with suppliers to implement policies. Richard, you mentioned policies as well, and we also believe policies are critical, because once you put policies into place and they're written down, everybody in the organization can understand the position of your brand, not just you, your employees, but also your customers as well. And then identifying current baselines. If you don't start to understand where you are today, it's very difficult to know where you want to go tomorrow. And last of all, communication. It's so key to engaging in your staff and your customers, and communicating, of course, your future targets. So I think with that, I want to thank the panelists. Thank you very much for your time, giving us this very diverse perspective. And I hope you have a nice rest of the day with the rest of the talks.
Thank you, Heidi, and our speakers for the insights on the importance of sustainable sourcing.